Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. In honor of National Donut Day on Friday, I thought that we would do a donut themed tumbler tutorial and we would spruce it up and add some rhinestones to the drip. So if you want to see how I created this design, stick around and I will show you. I'm using a spray painted white 16-ounce stemmy from the Stainless Steel Depot using the mixture listed above. We're going to mix about 15 milliliters of this glitter together into about 40 ounces of epoxy. And we're just going to apply the glitter and epoxy mixture directly to the cup, curing it as our first layer. That will allow us to go directly into a decal without having to do a second coat of epoxy. If you've never applied glitter and epoxy at one time, it's sort of a trust the process type of a situation. It does look pretty streaky until you get the torch on there to pop those micro bubbles. And then as it flows and starts curing, epoxy is self-leveling, so all of those streaks go away. It does look uniform. It doesn't look streaky. It looks like you just coated it with glitter and then epoxy like normal. So we're going to trust the process. We're going to let that spin until it cures overnight. I used the Flynn Sisters epoxy to apply this. And as you can see, this is just one coat, completely smooth to the touch, and we are ready for decals. Putting a decal on a curved surface is a little bit tricky, so I'm going to use my little painter's tape trick here, and instead of measuring, I'm just going to line that painter's tape up along the rim and apply my decal. I'm going to cut the pieces not all the way through, but just a little bit to give it some flexibility to be able to maneuver around that curve. If you don't do this, the decal does tend to pucker up. You get some lifting, you'll get creasing. It doesn't lay flat, and most of the time your decal will be crooked. So we're going to use that method and apply it, and then we're going to go into epoxy. I'm using a very thin layer of UV epoxy with As If mixed into it, just to give it a little bit of pinkness to kind of match up with that decal we've got going on in the forefront there. And I would say less is more in this step. You don't want to take away from the rhinestone drip. I really want that to be the focal point of this entire design. but being that the glitter is just white, it's kind of a silvery whitish mixture. I thought I would give it just a little bit of something else to add to it, since there was a lot of white going on in the background of the decal, or on the back side of the decal. Back side of the cup, opposite of the decal is what I'm trying to say. So I thought I would just add a little bit. This is totally optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but mixing that glitter into the epoxy is going to lessen the amounts of coats of epoxy you're going to have to apply. And then once that coat is cured, I'm going to go directly into sanding. Now be careful if you're using UV epoxy, the coat is going to be super thin over top of the decal. You'll notice that in my drip, I dripped it down over the letters in the decal on the first line because I sanded too hard and I kind of buffed off a little bit of that pink. So I put my super glue intentionally over that decal to hide that, and we fixed it. So next we're gonna go in with the glue gun. If you don't want to use a glue gun, you can do a drip with epoxy. I would not recommend doing fast set if you're not used to it, or if you're new to epoxy drips. It is a very quick process and it can get out of hand really quickly. So I'm just going to go around, and wherever I want a longer drip, I'm going to concentrate that glue. Wherever I want it to drip less, I'm going to obviously give it a little bit less glue there. So I did go around and make sure that it didn't go too far down dripped into the decal, with the exception of where I wanted to cover up my mistake. And then once I got to the handle, I added a little bit extra. I wanted it to drip down into the handle to give it a natural kind of donut frosting drip look. And so I love how that turned out, and that dries pretty quickly. Once it does, I'm just going to put my X-Acto knife around the top to kind of cut down on any of that glue that was over the top rim. And then we're going to go in with epoxy and paint, and we'll start rhinestoning. I initially started with this Posca paint pen. It was the perfect color. I thought it would be the easiest way to draw on this hot glue. But as I started going along, the hot glue and the paint pen started repelling. And so I was getting a lot of I want to say oil slick spots, if you will, if that makes sense. It just was kind of repelling, like fish-eyeing, I guess I would say. And so I just switched to acrylic paint. This is just some cheapy 79-cent paint from either Michael's or Hobby Lobby, I can't remember. And I'm gonna go over it. I'm not gonna be super particular just because it's gonna be covered up by rhinestones, but I wanna make sure that it has a base color on it. So any gaps in the rhinestone, you will see color and not just the hot glue. Also, I did pivot. Originally, I was going to use some light pink stones, and I only had them in one size, and that just was not working on the drip. I couldn't get them close enough together. There was a lot of gapping, so I pulled them off, and then I went through with the Aurora stones in a multi-size mixture, and that worked out perfect. It took the color from the paint and obviously translated through the opal stones, and it was the best decision that I had ever made. So it worked out great, but basically we're just going to paint this and epoxy it. Now you do want to make this your final coat of epoxy, so you don't want to do your drip until you're ready for the final coat, because you want to keep that texture of that drip. I wanted it to be really 3D. I wanted it to be present in your face. I didn't want to lose any of the dimension from that drip. So we're going to put the epoxy on kind of sloppy at first, just making sure we've got the entire cup covered. We got to make sure that we've got the entire drip covered. And then what we're going to do, like I did in my True Crime 3D drip, we're going to go back through and we're going to pull the epoxy out of the kind of where it's pooled up there. You'll see how I'm doing this here. It kind of pools up in those cavities. We're just going to pull it out of there, just making sure that there's not going to be any streaks in the epoxy on the actual glitter once you're doing that. So just be mindful that you're not being too aggressive in pulling that epoxy out from the the cavity there, and then making sure that's still completely smooth, because keep in mind this is going to be your final coat. And then once you've got that all covered and the epoxy pulled out, we're gonna torch it, let it cure, and then we're gonna go in with our sprinkles. So once again, I'm using UV epoxy to apply the sprinkles. I'm just taking this rubber tipped, I don't even know where I got it, and I don't even know what the true intention is for it. I think it came in like a mystery box or something. I don't even know, but it's just straight and it was the perfect sprinkle size. So I just dipped that rubber, we're gonna call it a pen, thing into my UV epoxy, dabbed it on in the shape that I wanted the sprinkle, or in the direction I wanted the sprinkle to lay. And then I went around and did that in the entire drip, and just every probably quarter of a section, I cured those sprinkles into place. You'll see here, I'm just dabbing that epoxy on, and then we're gonna lay the sprinkles after a little bit. And I didn't want to overwhelm the design with the sprinkles, so I just spaced them out pretty evenly, just changing directions of the sprinkles so it wasn't too boring, too repetitive. And then once everything was cured on, we're gonna go into the rhinestones. Now with the rhinestones, we're gonna start with the top rim first, because we wanna make sure, it's really, really important after you do all of this work that your lid fits on your cup properly. So we wanna make sure that that top row of stones is completely straight. It's not going to interfere with the lid laying flush and creating a good seal on the cup. I've done it before where I put it up a little bit too high and it just doesn't get a good seal on the cup, and then it's pointless if you're trying to travel with it, because obviously it's gonna spill. So first things first, we're gonna do that rim, and then I found it was easier to go along the bottom of the drip to get that in place and then fill in the stones in the center, rather than just filling it all in top to bottom. So we're gonna go around the edge of the entire drip, cure that every little bit of the way. You don't want to be super heavy-handed with your UV epoxy around the edges, because if you're working in sections and it's too runny, your stones are going to end up moving, migrating to whichever way is south, depending on the way that you're holding the cup. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to be really heavy-handed. You don't want to be too light-handed, because then your stones aren't going to adhere. In the long run, they're going to start falling off. So play with it. If you need to, you can always go back and add. If you need to pop the stones off, you can redo it, add some epoxy, re-cure it. It's a lot of work, but I would say just do some practice if you're not familiar with it. So I'm gonna let this play through, and I will see you guys at the end. All right, so after we go around and do the outline, fill in all of the stones, I did let this sit under my UV light spinning on my turner for probably about 15 minutes or so. I just wanted to make sure everything was completely cured. We didn't want any sticky UV resin because UV resin is notorious for that. And then after that was done, I went and washed my stones to get any wax off of them so you guys could see the maximum sparkle. And that is it for the design. So I hope you guys love this tutorial. I love the little sprinkle addition in with the rhinestones. I think it's so adorable. As always, let me know what you guys thought in the comments. If you're not already, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell button for future tutorials. And I will see you guys next weekend.